Hey loves, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the topic of revision, which I've discussed on previous videos in the context of Neville Goddard's teachings and universal law of assumption. But I also wanted to discuss a little bit about memory, and I wanted to go and delve further into this topic because I wanted to discuss it marrying in also the quantum theory perspective, multi-world theory, and I even saw actually a recent interview from Deepak Chopra that I'm going to reference, and I'm going to link it in the description box of the video. Now, love him or hate him, that's up to you. I know he can be a controversial figure in the new age scene and all of that, but I did find that there was something interesting that he addressed in that particular interview about memory. So let's talk a little bit about what memory is and revision and how that affects us when we are manifesting as conscious beings. So through the lens of Neville Goddard, quantum physics, the multiverse, and these insights from Deepak Chopra, let me actually unpack for you a little bit about what is a memory, how does it play into our present state, and how can we actually alter events moving forward, our assumptions, to get more of what we actually desire. So a memory is a memory, right, guys? But in fact, a memory is not something that is fixed or set. It is actually something that we experience, something sensory from a particular perspective at a particular state that we were in at the time. So when we talk about shifting consciousness, and Neville Goddard refers to memory, you know, he talks about the past as not necessarily something that happened that was set in stone, but it is something that we remember happened from a particular place or a particular version of self. So it's actually something that is, you know, filtered through the state that we were in at the time. So we have talked about this on previous videos, that there are infinite versions of us and that we move through states all the time. And when you revise a memory, you're not just rewriting a particular moment, you're actually moving from a state of consciousness that you were in at that time to another state of consciousness where effectively that moment could have happened differently, didn't happen at all, or you experienced that moment from a different perspective and had a different sensory experience, a different emotion, etc. Now, when you revise, you are essentially selecting a different state, one that aligns with what we would argue is a different version of reality or a different timeline that you would prefer. And you're also, in tandem with that, letting go of the assumptions that are tied to that experience and that particular timeline or state of consciousness. As we know, every state of consciousness or version of being has particular beliefs, thoughts, etc. tied in. So we also are breaking kind of a cause and effect that is tied up in that old story or version of being. So for example, in a memory where you remember that you were rejected, abandoned, hurt, etc., at that point in time, it was a reflection of a particular state that you were in. It was an experience that you had, and therefore there's a story and certain assumptions that are tied to that memory. Now, let's talk about memory and superposition and quantum mechanics, and I'll even marry in Deepak Chopra, as I referenced earlier. So through the lens of quantum mechanics, and even Deepak Chopra explains this in the interview that he had, he gives a perfect analogy about it. He asked the interviewer in the podcast to recall a memory from their teenage years. And the person responded that they remembered riding a bike. More and more details came to, the interviewer in the podcast, and Deepak asked him all about that and the sensations connected to that. But what Deepak explains in terms of our consciousness is, where were the details before whatever was noticed? Well, everything was already in a place of superposition, all possibilities, until consciousness or the individual observed them. So in quantum mechanics, a particle exists in all potential states until it's observed and then collapsed into a specific outcome. So the memory that that interviewer had of his childhood, of the scenery, etc., was actually through observation of the infinite possibilities that were available. So it's all coming down to perspective. So when you observe things differently, something new is actually collapsed or experienced. So this is what Neville was teaching all along. Revision isn't necessarily about denial, but it is about going back to an experience and choosing a different version of the past out of the infinite versions of reality that were available at that time, but also continue to exist in the field of consciousness, because superposition and quantum physics suggests that even though you have observed one particular outcome and one version of reality has collapsed, all the others continue to exist. Deepak also talks about the multiverse, and echoed in string theory, he explains the wave function splits into branches, each representing a different universe, and your observation is what dictates what your experience is. So that means that there are infinite versions of you in infinite realities at any given time. You're not limited to just one version of you or tied to your memories or the one experience that you had from the past that then had an echo or ripple effect that you're experiencing now. When you revise, when you shift, you're moving into a version of reality that already exists, where you are no longer in the same state of consciousness, no longer holding the same assumptions or beliefs or thoughts about self or about experiences or about others, no longer perpetuating the karmic cause and effect tied to that old experience, essentially. And I've spoken about karma in a previous video. I'll link it up for you guys to watch. But karma isn't some punishment system. I've already explained that. It's actually simply the result of assumptions you've accepted as true, and Deepak Chopra actually reinforces that in the video that I'm talking about. So, for example, the assumption that I'm always abandoned, or that I'm not enough, or that I'm not lovable can potentially then recreate those experiences of abandonment, or the assumption that I'm never chosen. Now, that could be tied very much to an old memory or an experience, and it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the moment you shift the assumption, or you go back to the memory and rewrite the story and have a different perspective of that story, it's like you're collapsing the wave function into a new version or a new experience as the observer. And as the observer, selecting a new story and a new perspective of what happened, you could revise the memory as you having always been loved, celebrated, safe, and you're not arguably just remembering it differently. You are stepping into an entirely different version of reality or timeline, one where the cause and effect is different. This is how we actually can stop karma. You are not dragging the past into your present by continuing to identify with it or in that state of consciousness. As Neville Goddard would talk about, consciousness is the field of all possibilities, or what we would liken to the quantum field, or your divine self, or the universe. It is where all versions of you exist, and it is timeless, past, present, and future existing all at once. And Neville said, God is the I am. And Deepak Chopra says, consciousness is the field of infinite possibility. Everything, memories, future identities, already exist there, waiting for you to observe and actually claim them. So when you let go of every concept or perception that you've clung to, your ego self, who you believe yourself to be in this present moment or to have been, or even your idea of what is real or true for you, you open the window to new versions of reality. And you're not under the obligation to be the same version of self that you were 5 minutes ago. Reality itself is shaped by what you observe, how you observe it, and what you assume to be true. And that is linked to your state of consciousness, the version of you that you are embodying. So guys, let me ask you, what memory are you ready to revise? What is your new story? What do you want to release, and what are you stepping into? Because you can do this in this very moment. What assumption are you done living from? You're not bound by your past. You are the observer. You are the operant power and the chooser of your timeline out of the infinite. And you're able to shift timelines in any given moment. Revision isn't pretending, it's selecting. It's stepping into the you that's already healed, already chosen, already powerful, and operating from that place where your perspective, your thoughts, your assumptions, and your sensory experience is very different. If this resonated for you, check out my video on the observer effect and quantum reality, which I'll link up here, and drop a comment below. What is your new reality? I love you guys so much. I believe in you. And remember, all states exist at once, all versions of you, and you get to decide right now who you want to be, and you get to choose your reality. You are, in fact, limitless. Love you guys so much. Until next time.